what we've done is we've put together a panel of specialists who come to us from both DPI and CISA 11, and they are here to talk with you about some of the initiatives statewide that I think some of you have voiced wanting to know more about, and we at the department would like you to know more about. And so they will each take a turn as a panel and give you an introduction to the work that they're doing. Daniel Parker is the consultant on the special education team that works with family involvement. He's also he's the liaison to the Wisconsin State Parent Education Initiative, or WSPE, and is also our autism consultant. Scott Brown, who is also at DPI on special ed, works with specific learning disabilities, or SLD, and also works in the area of dyslexia. Linda Maitrogene is at CISA 11, and she is the statewide transition director. She works in conjunction with Wendy Dawson at DPI, who is our transition consultant. So without further ado, we'll just turn it over to the three. And
thank you, Linda. I'm Daniel Parker. I am almost getting close to my first year at DPI. And I think even about 6 or 7 months ago, my joke was that I've been at DPI for 6 or 7 months, so I am technically in Wisconsin a veteran at DPI. It's still true. I am probably all the newbies. There's probably 11 or 12 people that were hired after me, actually. But it's a very exciting time on our special education team. We have a really great mix of people that have been there, our veterans, a lot of people working in procedural compliance, as well as a lot of new people with a lot of rich experience, which I'd like to think I'm one of. I am the Parent Involvement Indicator 8, which is one of the 20 indicators that the feds have laid out for states to assess each year. And Indicator 8 is parent involvement. I use the term family engagement interchangeably, and I'll probably be using that term moving forward. I'm also the autism consultant at DPI. And before I get into a little bit about family engagement and the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative, WSPE, which is our vehicle for helping educators and families around professional development and assistance with family engagement, I want to kind of give an overview of our DPI webpage. This is the main page at DPI, and to find our special education team, if you go to topics and then down to special education, you'll get to the special education index. It's a quick way to get to the special education index page of DPI. And this is a great page to have bookmarked. I know I have it bookmarked. It's my home page, because you have an A to Z index of topics for our special education team. So it's a wealth of resources here. And a few pages on that I want to point out. One is on the side over here, you have our team staff listing. So you can see all of the team members on our special education team, as well as their content area or their role at DPI. So if you have a question about learning disabilities and you want to find Scott, there's Scott Brown, and he's listed, and it'll take you to the web page that he is responsible for kind of updating. For mine, it'll have autism and WSPE, that was an Indicator 8. You'll see, if you have questions about cognitive disabilities or EBD, you can just quickly find resources and information through those pages. On the index, another area that I want to just point out that we often at DPI refer people when they have questions is the information update bulletin index. And bulletins used to be, before the web, bulletins were the way that DPI communicated information out to educators and families in the field. And we still do bulletins. Often they're fairly technical in nature, and a few come out every year. But if you have questions that students have around extended school year, transportation, use of paraprofessionals, there's lots of good stuff in here. There's a really good one that I often refer to on functional behavior assessment, which is an area of interest of mine, and using behavior intervention plans. So just good kind of basic general technical information as well as some compliance information. And if you look at our 20 indicators at DPI, indicator 8 is a parent involvement. It's a, some of them are compliance indicators. Indicator 8 is an improvement indicators, which means each year the state of Wisconsin needs to improve in how parents are reporting their interactions and kind of school climate, those types of things around parent involvement that schools are facilitating to families. The way that we do that in Wisconsin is through a survey. It's called the Parent Involvement Survey. Districts who are, it's aligned with district self-assessment cycle, so once every 5 years, parents in each district in Wisconsin, at least once every 5 years. In Milwaukee, they do it every year since they're such a big district. They take the parent survey. And one of the resources that I put out there that just may be of interest is I sent on the drive, and it's also available on our webpage, a sample, the survey. It's what the survey looks like. And one of the things that, you know, I'm pretty passionate about with my role with family engagement is that, you know, when you talk about RTI, there's a family engagement piece. When you talk about other initiatives, there's a family engagement piece. But I wouldn't, you know, and I've been actually really happy to hear about how family engagement in many of your courses are woven through everything. You know, I'm always a big advocate that it's not just a bullet point, but it really needs to be kind of an umbrella under which, you know, you are thinking about all the other things and including families. And with this survey, it's not a perfect survey by any means, but one activity you might consider doing with educators, making them aware of it, is looking at some of the items and thinking about when they're teaching, how are they going to facilitate some of these items? There's questions around letting parents know about other parent organizations in the state. And I know when I was teaching, I just came from 15, 16 years being in schools, you know, I always struggled knowing where are the resources for families. You know, I always thought, okay, well, I'll go ask the social worker, but I always felt kind of naked in not knowing where are those resources when I'm in a meeting or a parent's telling me that they're having trouble with getting health care or different types of things, even things outside of education. You know, where are those resources? So there's some nice questions kind of throughout the survey that have to do with school climate, how parents feel involved. There's questions about whether they're getting reporting on progress throughout the year, et cetera. So I'm thinking for institutes of higher education, what we do for educators in schools is we say, take the survey and see how you feel like your school does. I could see that being hard for pre-service people that are in, you know, that aren't in the schools, but perhaps an activity would be to take some of these items and just think about how they might facilitate family engagement around some of these items. So that's just one idea in that realm. But what I want to really get into now is a little bit more about WSPE, the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. And WSPE has been the vehicle for which our special education team at DPI has really driven family engagement over the last 11 years. It's a discretionary grant through the special education team at DPI. And one of the things I've come to find in the last 11 months is, although there are some other roles at DPI around family engagement, you know, it's WSPE, our special education team has given, and Stephanie Pesca has really given a lot of resources to go towards family engagement. It's pretty amazing. The WSPE grant is a huge discretionary grant. It's been around about 11 years. We have, in each of the CESAs, the Cooperative Educational Service Agencies in the state, there's 12 of them, in each CESA we have a WSPE parent coordinator, most of them work about half-time, who's a parent of a child with a disability, whose primary role in that CESA is to provide assistance, support, resources, information to families, but also to educators. And the idea at the time was, let's build a bridge between the educators and the families. Let's have someone who can almost be not so much a facilitator, but almost like an interpreter. So the WSPE parent coordinators, if a family is having difficulty in a district, the idea is that the special ed director or someone working at CISA can talk to the family or to the CISA family engagement coordinator at CISA, and they can ask them to contact the parent, or oftentimes the parents contact WSBE directly, and they can kind of communicate with the parent what's happening in the schools, what are the concerns, and kind of relay that information to the schools. In addition, not only are those coordinators relaying, kind of giving the parents' perspective, because they've been through this, but they're also giving the parents the school's perspective. So it's kind of a mutual partnership. Some of our WSBE parent coordinators do attend IEP meetings, but it's not their primary role. It's more in the area of just support and dissemination. Some of the things since coming on, some of the things we're looking at moving forward, and one thing I'll show you really quick, this is probably the most useful page of this. This is all their contacts. So these are our 12 coordinators in the state and their contact information at each of the CISA. They're free of charge. So many districts have to contract with CISA to get services, but due to the nature of this grant, anybody, any district, any parent, university, anyone calling WSBE, as per our grant, those services are free of charge. So they don't have to contract with CISA to receive these types of services. So one of the, a little bit more to kind of give you an idea how you might utilize WSBE. I talked with some of our WSBE liaisons. Martha DeYoung is one of the parent reps on the IHE hub, and she wasn't able to be here today, but she was here yesterday. And Mary Skadal is our state project director. Many of them do get invited to come in to talk to teachers who are at the IHE level and talk about family engagement. And one of the things that I have started to do in my autism trainings last year, and which is going to be fully ingrained this coming year, is making sure that I have a parent for some section of whatever workshop it is or anything that I'm doing, go up and just kind of talk about some aspect of that training. And a great example is we had a parent come in who talked about when her child was first evaluated for autism. And she talked about what it was like to sit around that table with 12 adults telling her that her child had has eligibility for autism and what that experience was like. And she kind of talked about it from the medical side and also on the education side. And this was a training where it was mostly teachers who have been teaching for many years, and we forget sometimes that when teachers are in IEP meetings, it's almost like being a surgeon. Everything becomes kind of mechanical, and getting back to that perspective of what that family is going through for the first time. I mean, people were writing on the evaluations like, thank you, I needed that. I needed to hear that perspective. And it wasn't by any means a scathing perspective. It was just like, here I was in fear, I was in denial, I was upset, there was too much information, it was a process. But one of the things she did say that was really valuable, because someone said, there's a tendency for teachers to kind of beat around the bush, like everything's great, everything's fine, it's okay, it's gonna be okay. And she was saying, I just needed to know what the situation was. So it was a really interesting message. So I would encourage you to invite WSBE, and it's actually part of our grant next year to partner with IHEs, and hopefully at least every one of our coordinators will go to at least have one interaction with an IHE, whether it's coming into a class to talk, whether it's just talking to the professor or the teacher or the instructor about giving them some resources and some ideas, etc. One of the exciting things that I've been working with WSBE is we really do look at the indicator data, and we develop family engagement kind of interventions to help districts with that parent survey with items that are showing low. And one thing that's interesting in the data, in the survey, the parent survey has been going on now we just are finishing up our 6th year, but for the first 5 years, one question on the survey has always been the lowest statewide every year, considerably lower than every other question. And the question asks that the school gave information about options of what parents can do if they disagree with the decision of the school. And for those of you who, many of you may know, there are many federally and state mandated dispute resolution options. we always encourage families, talk to the special ed director. I can't tell you how many times, and that would be something to talk with your teachers, is when that parent talks with the person who actually has a lot of the decision-making abilities for that district, so many problems can be resolved immediately. I've had at least 4 times this year a parent call me back and thank me for just connecting them with the special ed director. And special ed directors say, I had no idea this was a concern, because often the person the parent's talking to might be someone else in the school, someone on an IEP team, a principal, or someone who might not know about this specific special education nuance. So, whether it's general education that you're working with or special education, specifically, we really want to make better connections with our general education brothers and sisters, across the board. So I would really encourage you to contact WISPE to see what types of resources that coordinator has. Some of these guys have been doing this for over 10 years, and they're really, really talented people, and it's been a great joy to work with them. Let's see. There are some other special programs, Parents in Partnerships and Youth in Partnerships for Empowerment there are 5 weekend trainings that parents can go to. Okay. And they're excellent trainings, and I would highly recommend them. A few other quick resources, and I'll just finish up. There's a lot, part of my position also that I've really enjoyed is I'm connecting with a lot of the other parent organizations in Wisconsin, and there's several of them. A few that I would mention that I put brochures out for, there's Parent to Parent of Wisconsin. It matches parents with other parents to do mentoring. It's a very single-focused program, and it's fantastic. And Robin Mathey is the director for that program. The regional centers, there's 5 regional centers, and there's a really nice map of where they are. They're an organization that's kind of a one-stop shop. They know where the resources are for families, and they cover a lot more than just education. And then another one you definitely should know about is Wisconsin Facets. They're the Parent Training Information Center for Wisconsin, so they receive federal funding, and it's actually required in federal law that each state have a Parent Training Information Center, and Wisconsin Facets is a Parent Training Information Center for Wisconsin. And I meet with them every other month, and they're incredible. We also have a representative from Wisconsin Facets who's on the IHE SPDIG hub, and it's really Marlena, and it's just a really great organization that I've been able to work with, and WISPE and Facets kind of works together to develop materials. And I would encourage you also to call someone from Facets or some of these other parent organizations to come in and talk to students and have them talk about those experiences around family engagement. But those are some of the big ones around family engagement. If you guys have questions around that, WISPE is creating a new website over the summer. So that's why you don't, at some point the WISPE website's there's not a lot on it, but we're gonna have calendars of family engagement events. We're gonna have a lot more resources on that website, and we're in the process of developing a whole new string of resources for next year. So it's a very exciting time for us. But if you have questions, maybe at the end or another time, or I don't know if you want to wait till the end. We'll wait for the end and take questions. And now Scott Brown, who is brand new to DPI.
Okay, good morning, everybody. As Daniel said, I'm Scott Brown, and I'm one of the 2 people with the responsibility for supporting the program area of specific learning disabilities. Peggy and I, my colleague Peggy Rausch and I started in these roles in early January of this year, and it was definitely a time of hitting the ground running because much has changed with the laws and regulations around specific learning disabilities in Wisconsin. Right now, as we speak, my colleague Peggy is out finishing up a series of trainings that we had planned for school administrators around the state. She's going to every CISA, and we're also going to be covering the 5 largest districts around the state. So that's the first phase of our training, and it's a pleasure to be with you here this morning. There's a lot packed into the SLD rule, and I will not be covering all of that this morning, but I will give you sort of the bird's eye view, the 50,000-foot view of what the lay of the land is relative to SLD. I'll cover just a few updates on some of the resources that DPI will be making available to support the field as all of these changes go into effect, and then some of my thoughts as someone who went through a teacher preparation program and someone who knows the SLD rule fairly well, some of my thoughts for connections to higher education. So what is required by the specific learning disabilities rule? There are three main components to it, and please keep in mind that I'm giving you the very broad overview here. The first component is that the student needs to demonstrate inadequate classroom achievement as measured by a standardized achievement test in the area of concern. And the student's score must fall at least 1.25 standard deviations below the mean in that area. The second main component, and this is the first one, the inadequate classroom achievement, is not a big change to the law. The second component, the insufficient progress component, is a major change to the law. This means that the student demonstrates insufficient response to intensive scientific research-based or evidence-based interventions, two of which must be implemented with the student with adequate fidelity prior to identification with specific learning disability. These are implemented by licensed general education staff. Okay, so because at this point the student is still a general education student, no identification has been made. So all of the intervention implementation, all of the collection of progress monitoring data, all of that is done in general education. The third prong, or the third main component of the SLD rule, is the consideration of exclusionary factors. And this is different than in the past, because now exclusionary factors are really the lens through which you are considering those first two criteria. So when you're considering inadequate classroom achievement, when you're considering insufficient progress, the team needs to have discussions around, are the exclusionary factors of whether the student had a lack of adequate instruction, whether the student is a student who's an English language learner, whether other factors like other impairments, socioeconomic factors, those sorts of things are the primary cause for the inadequate progress, the inadequate achievement, or the insufficient progress. And if they are the primary reason, that student cannot be found to have a specific learning disability. So again, on December 1st of 2013, some changes to the law went into effect in 2010. However, the things that I'm telling you about now are things, especially the insufficient progress criteria with respect to interventions, those will be in effect for all public school students starting December 1st of 2013. So the significant discrepancy criteria that's now in place, that most schools, just about all schools around Wisconsin are using, and that's the discrepancy between measured ability, or IQ, and their measured achievement on achievement tests, that sunsets on December 1st of 2013. Which means it can no longer be used for initial evaluations for public school students. So what we're trying to do now is get everyone ready for that sunset. And what is it that we're doing in order to support all this change across the field? The first thing that we're working feverishly to finish are technical assistance materials. These will be out by fall of this year, so beginning of next school year. They'll be posted on the website, and this includes a new manual or guide on specific learning disabilities with this criteria. We are also developing case studies. We did get some good feedback from folks in higher ed that they really liked having those case studies to use in their classes. So we'll be developing a case study at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. Those will be posted on our website so that teams can see what the new criteria looks like as it's operationalized. As we go about the state and continue to get questions from the field, we keep our FAQs updated. So this is a resource for people who might have some commonly asked questions around SLD. Those are also on our webpage. Sometimes we can't really address a topic in as interactive a way as we would like in written guidance materials, and so we're using Articulate software as well as webinars to do some online learning modules. So for example, something like progress monitoring and charting out progress monitoring data is something that may need to be demonstrated through a more interactive model than just in a chapter in a guidance material. We also have an SLD listserv. You are welcome to be part of this if you would like. Our plan is to have sort of a box on the SLD webpage where you can go in and put in your email address and sign up automatically. That is not yet there. So if you'd like to sign up, feel free to send me an email and I will get you the address so that you can join. We will be using that as the main communication mechanism around SLD. So as we announce trainings, updated materials, and so forth, that will become a much more active listserv and a way to access information. In addition to the administrator trainings that are ending this spring, as Peggy finishes those up, we will be offering a set of trainings for school-based teams. These will be full-day trainings, and they will start in October, and they will be all over the state. The plan is to offer them in every CISA, as well as the 5 largest districts. We'll probably do them twice, once in the fall and once in the spring, just by virtue of the fact that we have so many people who need to be trained. Other DPI staff, and I would think that RTI center staff, will also be offering trainings on topics that overlap with the SLD rule. And finally, you've probably noticed that the SLD website is going to be our hub for all of our resources related to SLD and also external links that will be useful for folks as they're making decisions around specific learning disabilities. I will be the first to admit that our web page in its current format is not the most user-friendly web page on the planet. We do have plans, once DPI as an agency adopts some new web software or something, we will update the SLD web page to get it more organized and user-friendly for you, so hang in there with us. One of the commonly asked questions that we get almost always from the field is, how do we select interventions and how do we know that they meet the criteria as established in the SLD rule? Meaning, how do we know if they're scientific research based? How do we know if they're evidence based? Those are very, very high standards that teams need to ensure they've met before they label a student. And so we've heard the field, and we've actually contracted with Great Lakes West, which is a federally funded research group. They are vetting, they are going on websites and looking at the commonly used interventions out there, so on Intervention Central and What Works Clearinghouse and those kinds of places. They are vetting the research that is behind those interventions, and they're creating a database. So, for example, if you have concerns about a student in the area of math calculation, you'll be able to go on to this database, and you'll be able to see the interventions that are available, and you'll be able to see what the research is behind them to support your decision of whether to use the intervention or not. It is important to mention that this will not be a DPI approved list. There is absolutely no directive that says you have to use an intervention from this list, or that you can't select something on your own. That's totally fine. This is really just a tool because we were getting so many questions about how to look at the research behind the interventions and even what to look for. So that will actually be available this October, and we will incorporate that into our training so that everyone can see it. So these are some of my thoughts, as I said in the beginning, on, as someone who has gone through teacher preparation programs, as someone who has served as both a regular and special educator, and as someone who knows the SLD rule and sort of what it means for the field. These are some things that I'm sharing with you, and I would say that this is more of a personal reflection on my experiences than it is a DPI-related thing, and you may be doing many of these things or have already thought of many of these things, but it's just some conversation starters and some seeds to plant. The first is around culturally responsive practices. This is a phrase that's often used in the field, but it's actually referenced directly in the SLD rule itself, and it's referenced around selecting interventions for students, that it is expected that not only have students received high quality core instruction that is appropriately differentiated and that has been culturally sensitive and responsive, but the interventions themselves should be culturally responsive and sensitive. Meaning if you're selecting an intervention that is normed, knowing to ask the questions around who was that normed with. If I'm working and trying to implement an intervention with a Hispanic student, and the intervention that I'm selecting was normed on a different cultural group, is that going to impact the student's success? And teams need to know to ask those critical questions. When I was a full-time grad student at UW-Madison, my advisor and supervisor actually implemented a law course for pre-service teachers. Not sure if it's still on the docket to be taught or not. It is. It was extremely popular, having had the opportunity to be the guest speaker in there a couple of times. I can tell you the students absolutely loved it. And I can also tell you that my colleagues in the admin program highly value the law courses taught from a principal and director of special education perspective, because those are things that are often left out. So as you're thinking through teacher preparation, making sure your teachers can answer questions like, if I have a student with an IEP in my class, what is my responsibility? If I have a student with a 504 plan in my class, what are my responsibilities and obligations? What are my responsibilities and obligations for referring students who I suspect may have a disability? Just some things to think about that oftentimes are overlooked in pre-service programs. One of the unique things about the SLD law is its reliance upon data. One of the things that Peggy and myself and others get pressed really hard on by the field is people want it to be very black and white. They want a cut score. They want to know yes or no, is the kid in or out. And this law does not lend itself to that. This law is really a very gray area, and it requires teams to sit down and do a lot of data analysis and really problem solve around a student, which is a good thing. That's a really good thing, because the spirit of the law is to ensure that we are not labeling students with disabilities and making very high stakes, life-changing decisions without really, really delving into the data and making sure that the student has had every opportunity to learn, particularly in the areas that we're concerned about. So teachers need to be more steeped than ever before in being able to collect, analyze, and progress monitor and have data inform and drive instruction. Those are really critical things, because if no one is keeping track of how students are doing or checking for understanding or assessing progress, that's when, one of the questions that we, that kind of prompted this is that we get from the field is, okay, if you're telling me that I need to do these interventions with fidelity, that could mean that I have 2 interventions, each one approximately 12 weeks. So that's more than half of a school year I could be implementing interventions. And if I have a 4th grader who I'm referring for SLD and it's March, you're telling me that I could be into the beginning of the next year before we're really even making an eligibility decision. And my response to that question is, well, I would hope that you're doing enough data analysis that it isn't March of 4th grade before you realize that a student isn't learning, and that interventions need to be implemented, that it should be much, much earlier than that. And that is what this law is prompting. So while RTI is not required by this law, it is not. All that's required is that you're doing interventions. I can't imagine really trying to, and this is me putting on my administrator hat now, I would not want to be in charge of a school system or building without some sort of multi-level system of support that has the capacity to screen students, collect data, implement interventions, and progress monitor, and not have to do all of those things on a student-by-student basis just to comply with the SLD law, because multi-level systems of support are really about supporting all students. So along with driving instruction is understanding how and when to intervene. That's, what is my data telling me about the student? And how do I know that this is the right intervention to use at this time with this student? Collaborating with colleagues is something that's also part of this law, but it's also part of best practice. I can tell you a little bit about my experience as an administrator. Teachers more and more now in the field are required to work as part of collaborative teams. And one of the things that I provided a lot of professional development on is when special educators are going into general education classrooms to support students. When I started in my position, we had a lot of special ed teachers sitting in the back of the room taking notes and not doing a lot of the instructional practice and modification that needed to be done for students with IEPs. That really can't happen anymore as we really look closely, and I think that from a federal level and a state level, there will be an increasing focus on closing the achievement gap between students with disabilities and their typical peers. And so the ability to collaborate with colleagues and problem solve around students is critical. And finally, if I had to encapsulate the SLD rule with one phrase, that phrase would be problem solving. That this is really about coming out of higher education institutions, being able to solve problems, use data effectively, and plan instruction based on that data. And so that was not meant to be an exhaustive list, but just some of my thoughts. I know that I can speak for myself and my special ed colleagues when I say that at DPI we are more than willing and we are very interested in partnering with you in any way that we can to improve the achievement of kids all over the state. And so if you have ideas of ways that we can do that and work together and put our heads together, then please be in touch. We'd love to work with you, and I thank you for your time this morning. And I'll turn it over to Linda.
Okay, I'm here to talk about transition. And my name again is Linda Mettergene, and I'm the director of the Wisconsin Statewide Transition Initiative. That is a grant project funded through the Department of Public Instruction. The grant project itself has been around for about 11 years. Actually 12 years we're going on, so we've been around for a while. There's two main priorities in transition that we really need to relay to you today. And I think the implications that Scott just talked about also affect the transition planning for kids with disabilities as well. So you have some handouts that should be available to you on the flash drive. There's the Indicator 13 checklist. There's the compliance examples, and these are the examples and non-examples of what meets compliance for each element of Indicator 13. And I also sent in a presentation for the summary of performance. So our two main priorities are Indicator 13 and the summary of performance. Indicator 13 is the percent of youth age 16 and above with IEPs that include appropriate measurable secondary goals, and these are annually updated. And there's a subsequent transition plan that goes along with those goals. Our state, along with every other state in the country, has to achieve 100% compliance with this indicator. Currently in Wisconsin, we are at 72% compliance, and we've been at this for quite a few years, 5 to be exact, going on 6. And so to date, we have provided training in terms of full day in-service opportunities to our teachers who are already in the field. And what we want to do is expand that and collaborate with all of you so that we can bring training into the pre-service programs. And so we want teachers who are coming into the field to have a real solid understanding of what it takes to write good, comprehensive transition plans for kids with disabilities. Because ultimately, what that is going to do is affect the outcomes of our kids with disabilities. They're going to more likely go on to post-secondary education, more likely be competitively employed, and more likely live independently. Currently, we have several resources available for you to use in your teacher prep programs. And I would pull up the WISTE website, but we are under construction and it's going to be changing here, as this seems to be a pretty common theme. It's going to be changing here in the next couple of weeks. So I could pull it up now, and when you go back and pull it up, it's going to look completely different. One big change is the Department of Public Instruction has put together the post-secondary transition plan system. And what this is are the transition pages that now school district staff, teachers are going to have to enter on the DPI portal so that they're entering the transition planning IEP right on the DPI portal, and those pages are written in such a way to collect data so that it will increase compliance with Indicator 13. That will be available to all school districts. The plan is for that to be available in the fall. We also have created 8 online mini modules, one for each of the elements of Indicator 13. And those modules include a pre and a post test. They were designed to take about 15 to 20 minutes, give or take however long it takes the person to go through them. So the person will go in, take the pre-test, find out what their score is, and then be able to do the online module and then take the post-test. And once they get 100% on that post-test, they can print out a certificate to say that they've completed those. So those modules were actually, I have a meeting shortly after this one to just finalize those and get those posted to the WISTE website. All of the handouts that we currently use in our full day in-service for teachers are posted to the WISTE website as well as the DPI website. And just to caution you that each state interprets Indicator 13 just a little bit differently, so there's nuances with the way that our legal team has interpreted Indicator 13. So if you're using Indicator 13 documents and resources, you'll want to make sure you're pulling those off of either the WISTE website, that's wsti.org, or the DPI website. If you go to other states and pull it off of there, or go to the National Technical Assistance Center's website and pull the resources off of there, their examples may be just different enough that they don't meet compliance here in Wisconsin. So I just wanted to caution you on that. In the most challenging area of writing transition IEPs is writing measurable post-secondary goals that meet compliance. And so that is our highest ranking error. And so we do have examples. Another resource, one of the things that teachers frequently ask us for is give us some good examples. So what we do is look at students' strengths, their preferences and interests, and with that information, help them write measurable post-secondary goals. And what's required is students have to have measurable post-secondary goals in the area of education or training and employment, and if necessary, independent living. And so we have put together some more examples of that because that's where we're having most of our challenges in meeting Indicator 13 compliance. One of the things I would like you to talk about just briefly at your tables today is the successes and challenges that you've had with presenting Indicator 13 information in your pre-service programs. And one of the things that I guess I'm wondering is we've tried to put the training together, and it's been a one-day practice, and we use case studies, and all of this is research-based professional development. But I want a realistic picture of what it's going to take for you to be able to implement whatever resources. And I'm guessing that instructional time may be a bit of a barrier, that a full-day in-service program may not be something that you can implement. So a couple things I'd like to have you talk about briefly is what kinds of challenges have you had in implementing Indicator 13 in your pre-service programs, and then what successes have you had? Where are the barriers? What kinds of things do we need to be aware of as we're developing resources to help support you and what you're trying to do in your pre-service programs? So if you can just take a few minutes and talk amongst yourselves, we'll come back together and just highlight a few of those. Okay, what are some of the successes that you've had with implementing Indicator 13 professional development within your pre-service programs? Whether it's some resources that you found that have been helpful or ways to engage your students in learning this. Or maybe this has just been a real challenging area. Maybe we should start with the challenges. What have been the challenges? Yes. Okay. Absolutely, and actually that question I heard come up quite a bit around the room here too. So, okay. How many of you are incorporating Indicator 13 in some coursework somewhere along the line? Okay, we have a few. And can I ask what resources you're using? WISTE? Yes, great. Okay, so different community agencies, that's all a big part of transition planning. Do you feel the need to have concise professional development to get across, or not necessarily? You teach a course on transition, and it's included right in that course. Great.
I would say we've got a course on transition, and then it comes back to then have a course on assessment and IHE writing.
Okay.
But I think the more succinct the materials are, the better for our students.
Okay.
We have enough trouble getting them back to something in the first place.
Yes.
If it's quick and they can understand it easily and can do an activity with it,
Okay. Great.
it's more helpful than if there's a lot of materials to look at and read in.
Great. Okay. And that's kind of been the onus of some of the resources that we've developed this past year and have posted to the website. So if you haven't gone to WSTI.org, WSTI.org, on the left menu currently, and this is going to change in a couple of weeks, there's an Indicator 13 button on the left menu, and if you click on that, all of our resources are included under that tab. So one of the things that we're planning to do as part of the WSTI project is follow up with each pre-service program to begin to collect information on which courses that you're teaching include Indicator 13 and what resources you're currently using. And then we're going to use that information to be able to kind of work with you and hopefully be able to support you on what you're trying to do so that our teachers are leaving the pre-service programs kind of ready to hit the ground running. The last thing I want to briefly talk about is the summary of performance. And you do have this presentation. The summary of performance is a summary of academic achievement, functional performance, and recommendations to assist the student in meeting their measurable post-secondary goal areas. This is required by law at the exit of high school. There are, again, resources on the WSTI website on that left menu right now. There is a tab called Summary Performance, and all of our resources are there. We are also creating, actually just finalizing another mini module using Articulate to do the online module with the pre and the post test. So that could be something that you could send your pre-service students out to be able to get more information on the summary performance. A little data on the summary performance: our completion rate has improved. From over the past couple of years, we have been collecting data on summary performance completion rate. And for students who are exiting with a diploma, we were at 57%. That has increased to 89%. So 9 out of 10 of our students actually have a summary of performance in their file when they leave high school. That's what that means. And for our students who are aging out, not graduating with a diploma, we're at 88%. So we have seen considerable gains in what's happening across our state in the area of summary of performance completion rates. One of the things that we're looking and talking about doing and moving into is, now what does that mean in terms of effective practice? And in transition, effective practice contrasts with meeting compliance, if you will. And compliance is we need to make sure our documentation includes these kinds of things. When we move to effective practice, we're really talking about now, as we're meeting compliance with each of these things, how are we engaging the student in each area? And that's what Scott was talking about too. It's really about engaging youth so that they become empowered to make the choices they need to be successful adults. So that's what I have in terms of transition. If you have questions, I think we're going to do kind of a question and answer right now. Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's basically the mothers who take care of the transition for their individual kids. And it's a never-ending job. People don't come up to you and tell you, here's a good place for you to go, here's another place for you to go. Different agencies don't communicate with each other. If we didn't have mothers, we wouldn't have transition.
And we do collaborate a lot with Daniel with the parent educator initiative and with facets and other parent organizations, because we absolutely have to engage the family in the transition planning process. Any other questions?
Just a comment as to the advocacy issue. One of the challenges that we have in helping parents is one that schools don't take the starting at age 14 very seriously. And the other aspect that we really try to incorporate into that transition IEP is the attendance of the student.
Our federal law requires transition planning to begin at age 16. Our state law requires it at age 14. So in Wisconsin, we're required by law to start transition planning at age 14. When we check compliance with Indicator 13, which is our federal requirement, we're pulling those IEPs of 16-year and older students. Now, there is new momentum taking place at the federal level. In terms of Ready by 21 and PK 16, and that transition planning really begins in early childhood. And so the movement now is, yes, we think 14 is not early enough. Where we're going on a national level is we need to start having those conversations with kids and with their families, with the parents at the IEP meetings in early childhood and our early elementary grades, to talk about going on to college is a very viable option for you. We need to start planting those seeds early. So that's a huge paradigm shift that's going on the national level that you're going to start hearing here. It's embedded in our Common Core standards and all different kinds of things that we have going on. So what we're starting to see is an overlap and dovetailing of the various initiatives that are going on.
I want to jump in on
Yep.
a resource. Thumbs up, thumbs down, sideways if you've heard or familiar with Opening Doors series. So Opening Doors, highly recommend to get into your hands of your students. There's a 5-series, I think, series. It's through Department of Public Instruction around transition, and the topics such as what types of activities you can do, even in elementary, for preparing for transition. It really breaks it down. The difference between what high school looks like. There's one for transition into adulthood, transition into post-secondary. They're really, really, really nice, simple, free resources that you can find online.
They're on the WISTE website as well. We're also right now finalizing a couple additional ones through some support from SPDIG.
And if you go to that SPED index and go down to transition, the transition page, it has all the Opening Doors series there.
A couple different places. Any other questions?
Could you just clarify something? You said it went from 57% graduation up to 89%. That's a 32% increase. Can you explain that a little bit more?
It's the summary of performance completion, not graduation. In other words, that document was included in students' files. Districts were getting that done, and they were included in, because that's a requirement that students have to have a summary of performance upon exit from high school. It's a different, yep, not graduation, summary of performance completion. Thank you for asking that. Current percentage of students with disabilities that graduate. Anybody have that number off the top of your head?
The department just released its new graduation rates, and according to the article that I read, we are up at about 80% statewide. However, when you look at, I've just been looking at some disaggregated numbers, it really varies widely CISA to CISA. And not only that, but there are, district to district, there are different practices for graduating students with disabilities. So you have to really dig into the data to get the full picture. But that's the latest numbers. And we had been prior to the newest announcement of the data, we had been hovering right around 77, 76%. So it has increased, but again, there's more to the story than just the numbers, as with any data. Yes, we do have that disag as well. So we can, you're certainly welcome to the data. We can, actually, if you're interested in the graduation data for indicator 1, I can put it up on the SPDIG website. I mean, we actually have a great, we call him our data dude, Ken Donahue is part of the special education team, and he does a great job with interpreting and doing data for all of us on the team. And he's done a great, it's called a GIF map, which takes the data and actually maps it out statewide, school district by school district, from red alert school districts all the way to the ones that are, that are doing a nice job with their students with disabilities graduation. So I can get that up. Any other questions for any of our panelists?
Thank you. The parent coordinators that came into your class, I mean, they get a lot of training, and they also, one of the things we're doing next year is we're really lining their training up with the other grant initiatives. So there's a mediation grant, there's CREATE, which works around disproportionality, early childhood, WISTE, which is the transition initiative. So a lot of our trainings that we give to the coordinators that then bring that to district level, family engagement people, and also including and always inviting Wisconsin Facets, our partners in family engagement in Wisconsin, to those trainings, so that we really want accurate and timely information that those parents can then hear about the initiatives through DPI and then be able to relate that to families because they have the expertise of that interpretation between what's happening and kind of the special ed or legal or educator terms, and bringing that down to where it's really much more it works better for how they communicate with families. So thank you for that comment.
Anyone else? And Greg just showed me from the DPI website, the graduation rate for students with disabilities is 79.3%, so I stand corrected. We are just at 9:45, and we have on the schedule a 15-minute break for you.
Before I would like to make one brief announcement before I introduce Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Just some of you may know this already, but the U.S. Department of Ed OSEP personnel prep grants are the announcement for those personnel preparation grants have been made. They are due on June 25th. And I don't know if anybody in here has ever had those personnel prep grants. They're really designed for pre-service teacher education programs. There's also a leadership group. There's also a leadership category. It's all pre-service in all of the fields related to special education, starting in early intervention, early childhood, K-12, also includes all of those pre-service programs plus the leadership. And if you're interested, you just have to Google the personnel prep grants if you haven't seen any of the announcements. They're 5-year grants that are for up to $250,000 a year, and 60% of the funds are intended for scholarships for students, or 60 to 65, I think it's 60 or 65%, so it's a big chunk of the 250. So it's really meant to support student scholarship through funding to be able to participate, for you to do something adding value to your training programs that meet the priorities of these grants. I had these grants for many many years, like 14 or 15 years, and just haven't done it in the last couple of years. But what I always used them for was for cross-department interdisciplinary training in the early childhood area. UW La Crosse has always had one in adaptive Fayette or something like that for many years, and UW Milwaukee, Mary McLean has had many of these grants for many of years. But it's new opportunities if you've never, UW Whitewater used to have some. If you've never done it before, you might be interested in taking a look at what they are. So if you Google OSEP Special Ed Personnel Prep Grants, it will come up for you. Okay. And we are so honored this morning to have Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings with us. When we first connected in January to invite her to be with us to address our priority around culturally relevant pedagogy, it was very clear to most of our committee members that it would be wonderful to have Gloria with us. We did have to track Gloria down in Spain in January because she was receiving an honorary degree from the University of Alicante in Alicante, Spain, right along with Linda Darling Hammond and Marilyn Cochran Smith. And when we were just chatting before, we learned that this honorary degree occurs often, but this is the first time that education had ever been considered a field for receiving this honorary degree. So. And so, as our program tells us, Dr. Ladson-Billings is the Kellner Family Professor of Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at UW-Madison, but she is also a faculty affiliate in the Department of Ed Policy Studies. She is the former president of the American Education of Research Association, and her area of specialty that brings her to us is research examining the pedagogical practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She also investigates critical race theory applications to education. She is author of the critically acclaimed book, The Dream Keepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children Crossing Over to Canaan, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classrooms, and numerous other journal articles and book chapters. Today, she's going to be talking to us about Those Who Teach Can, reinvesting in and reinventing teacher education. So we have a couple of hours here to spend with you, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, and good morning. All right. I'm from a Baptist church. I'm used to people talking to me, and I'm at the podium just so I don't drop all the papers. I'm not trying to be officious here. I want to, and I'm going to try to give you what I guess is the view from 10,000 feet. A lot of your talk has been very specific about statewide issues and particular regulations and statutes you have to deal with. But I think we do have to get engaged in the larger discourse about teachers and teacher education so that we can be advocates at that statewide and local level. So I'm going to kind of go to that view, that 10,000-foot view, but I'm also going to try to move away from what I call the technocratic and move us towards the transactional, and I'll talk more about that when I get you working on some stuff. I purposely did not send the PowerPoint. You know me, you know that I believe that PowerPoint is evil. Gave a talk at the law school. I said, I don't have a PowerPoint. I got a standing ovation. People just stood up. Oh, yeah, we're just so happy now. But one of the reasons why I don't send them ahead of time is, number one, I'm tinkering to the last minute. And I've stopped doing what I would call PowerPoint-dependent presentations. First of all, silly me, I presume you can read. So I don't put a lot of stuff up there for you to read. I give you some images to give you an association and a hook with what I'm saying. So I tend to do what I would call PowerPoint assisted presentations. And if the PowerPoint fails, I'm still good, okay? You know. So if you must have it, although it's not going to make any sense to anybody but you because you actually heard it, but you won't be able to, it won't make sense to anybody else, I can send it to the conference organizers and you can have the pictures, because it's mostly pictures. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase, those who can't teach. Its origins is reputedly from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. And the actual quote is, "He who can does, he who cannot teaches." A variation of the saying is from Woody Allen, who said, "Those who can't do, teach, and those who can't teach, teach Jim." Now, while both, I think, are funny on some level, the notion of the incompetent teacher has become pervasive throughout our culture. And while there's always been a lack of status and prestige for teachers and their work throughout history, I believe that we are witnessing an unprecedented assault on teachers and the teaching profession. The Center for the Future of Teaching and Learning published a study entitled "The Status of the Teaching Profession 2011" that was actually done in California and on California teachers, and it points to many of the challenges that the teaching force in that state, and by extension, the nation, are facing. And this report begins, quote, "If the quality of California's future rests to a large degree on how well it educates its youth, that future looks grim." The background report for the International Summit on the Teaching Profession indicates that teachers in the United States earn about 80% of what other workers with college degrees earn. This is lower than our counterparts in New Zealand, Germany, Australia, Finland, and 16 other modern nation states. In the introduction, you heard that I'd been in Alicante, and this is the first time they'd honored teacher education. What I thought was really quite touching is that the university rector, which is our equivalent of president or chancellor, said he didn't know much about education as a field. He's an economist. He said, "But I read these women's work, and he says, this is something we all got to get involved in." I mean, it was really interesting to me that you could lead a university and not understand the central place of education. But to his credit, he read the work and thought, you know, we've got to change how we do things. So it turns out, as I said, teachers in this country don't make as much as our international counterparts. And what seems to be paradoxical evidence to me is that a recent survey of professionals indicates that teachers were tied with scientists as the second highest ranked prestigious professionals. Only firefighters ranked higher. So these professions listed after teachers include doctors, military officers, nurses, police officers, priests, ministers or clergy, farmers, and engineers. Kind of interesting, right? The 10 lowest professions, prestige professions, were real estate agents or brokers, actors, bankers, accountants, entertainers, stockbrokers, journalists, union leaders, business executives, and athletes. Now let's be clear, this is not the survey of the most highly paid professions, because indeed there seems to be an inverse relationship between prestige and money in this survey. But what puzzles me about the place of teachers on the high prestige list is the nagging feeling that I have that teachers have somehow become the new enemy. And I imagine that the fact that union leaders appear on the low prestige list has something to do with how we have come to see today's teacher. And perhaps I'm given to hyperbole, but I'd like to walk through what I see as a brief look at the transformation of the teacher from hero to goat. And I want to try to do this by tracing what I think of as two contradictory narratives about teaching. One, that teachers are the source of the problem. And two, teachers are the solution to the problem. So let's start with this notion of the teacher as the source of the problem. You may recall in 1983 when then President Ronald Reagan's Commission on Excellence in Education published its report, A Nation at Risk. We were told that the primary problems with education in our country were the fragmented and weak curriculum, the lack of regular or standard assessments, the limited amount of time on task, and the teaching, particularly the preparation and those who select teaching as a profession. So out of the identification of that set of problems, we got a more standards-based curriculum, even scripted ones in some cases, constant standardized testing, the elimination of recess, and the paradox of increased teacher preparation requirements in traditional teacher education programs and limited preparation for those who choose to go into teaching through alternative routes. I mean, that I have trouble holding that in my head, you know. We regularly hear that the single most important aspect of a student's education is the teacher standing in his or her classroom. And I agree that teachers are extremely important in ensuring the quality of students' education, but in a knowledge economy where information comes from all directions, and the ability to access that information is either helped or hindered by external forces, we cannot put the entire onus on teachers for educational success. If teachers are the sole variable, then we must be admitting that we have put all of the best teachers in the suburbs and all of the worst ones in cities and rural communities. Simple solution would just be relocation. But we know better. We are dealing with an incredible set of complexities. If we look nationally, we see that our children are living under some of the most stressful conditions imaginable. Okay, so of course I'm out of sync with this thing, right? Because I already told you all this stuff. Okay. So 1 in 2 of our kids will live in a single-parent family at some point in their childhood. That's just life. The best of families come apart. In the best of families, someone passes away. You know, think about how many kids have lost a parent in war that's been going on for 10 years. I mean, they didn't plan to lose a parent. It just happens. 1 in 3 is born to unmarried parents. I'm not making a statement of morality here, but what I'm saying to you is that if you don't have the benefit of at least 2 parents, there's all kinds of human and social capital that you're cut off from. Insurance, Social Security benefits, because you're missing one other person who could be directly contributing to your well-being. 1 in 3 will be poor at some point in their childhood. And we know that poverty has a debilitating effect on people. I don't, however, want to slip into this notion that the reason that kids can't learn is because they're, quote, from a culture of poverty. That just offends me to the nth degree. Because number one, poverty is not a culture. Because if it was, then 75% of the world's in that culture. Poverty is a set of social conditions. It's some decisions that societies decide, and decide that this is more important than that. You know, I'm still, I guess I shouldn't say chuckling, but you can lose $1 billion and not lose your job. One of my kids worked at KFC in high school, and if the register came out 75 cents short, everybody on the shift got fired. But you can lose $1 billion and still be working that same job. There's decisions that we make as a society, right, that create poverty. 1 in 3 is behind a year or more in school. And this is a soapbox thing for me. I think the worst, well, let me back up. People talk bad about education research, but there's one piece of education research that we are foursquare on every time they replicate the study, we get the same results, and that is that retention is a predictor of one thing: dropout. But why do we want to retain everybody? Part of it has to do with the fact that we tend to be a punishment society. You know, and so here's the script. Well, they just are doing social promotion. Duh, we social animals. It does matter if you are 7 that you be with a cohort of 7-year-olds. You know, this notion of adolescent and child development, I mean, we spend a lot of time trying to get students to get it, and then we have a policy like retention that totally disrupts the whole notion. There is a big difference between a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. Those of you who have taught in high school, you know when they come in the door, they don't look anything like what they look at on graduation night. You sitting at graduation going, oh my God, that's Jamel? Huh! Because they've changed that much. And when we decide that retention is the way to help them, we've totally disregarded all of research, and we want everything to be research-based. The research says it's not a good idea. All right, let me get off that, because I can go on that. 2 in 5 never complete a single year of college. You know, that was a question that came up in the earlier session. How are the students doing? It's hard to make it in this society without a college degree. And I know people tell me all the time, oh, you know, you don't have, you know, everybody shouldn't get a college degree. The people who say that never say that about their own children. What I say is everybody should be eligible to get a college degree. Now, if they make a different choice, that's on them. But we should not be putting kids in situations where they can't even be eligible to earn a college degree. 1 in 7 has a worker in their family, but they're still poor. We never talk about the working poor. So we have an image of the poor as the lazy, the incompetent. They're just sitting around somewhere being poor. But people are poor as a consequence of the way in which we've structured our society. You know, I always think about my own late father that, you know, he had a 3rd grade education. But he ended up in an economy that was in a boom time. So despite the fact that he had no education, he had a minimum wage job, and he and my mom were able to afford a home. So we actually owned our own home. But in today's economy, a man like my father would be homeless. That's how much things have changed. Oops, sorry. 1 in 8 never graduates from high school. So we're not even talking about going to college. We're in a knowledge and information society, and we got a bunch of kids who will not graduate from high school. You know, for me, this salience of a college degree has to do with me walking into Macy's, and you know how those people used to spray that stuff on you? Okay, you know, environmentally they can't spray it on you no more, so they spray it on a card, you know, like, okay, who had chemistry? Okay, you spray it on a card, it's still in the atmosphere, right? But those used to be the high school graduates. Okay, now it's college graduates spraying on that card. Literally, our high school graduates are having to compete with college graduates for work in this economy. And so if you don't graduate from high school, you have almost no way to compete. 1 in 5 was born poor, as I said earlier. So that's like from the beginning, they almost stand no chance because they're so far down the social economic rung. And 1 in 5 is born to a mother who did not graduate from high school. So I was listening to the earlier panel talking about parent engagement. There are a lot of parents who don't want to engage with us because their last engagement with us was not a good one. It was when they were students. And I point out the mother, because that's typically who we engage with. There's no knock against dads. You know, there are a lot of good dads who are the people who come to schools. But in general, schools deal with moms. And so if mom didn't graduate from high school, you know, it's difficult for mom to be the person to be the advocate. And so there are lots of communities in which we need to help people not just have the parent, but we need to develop what I would call kind of community ombudspersons. You know, in the literature, Annette Henry calls it other mothers, that there are people in the community that moms will trust, who will go to schools on their behalf. That's a role I've played for many working class and low income parents. Unfortunately, the schools hate it for it, but it's me, because I know too much. In fact, I got an email today from Iowa with a woman saying that her kid can't get into advanced placement. And she says, I remember your saying, I had a right to have my child in advanced placement. I said, yes, you do, because you paid the taxes on that advanced placement class too. But yet parents think, well, the teacher didn't recommend. Well, that was her recommendation. You need to go make your recommendation. My recommendation is that my child be right here. And so just understanding how the system operates is difficult for people with education. So think about those kids whose parents did not finish school. 1 in 7 has no health care. I won't spend too much time on this, but I will say that a colleague from Teachers College, Richard Rothstein, argues that if we really cared about our kids, we stop having these arguments about things like whole language versus phonics and old math versus new math or no math, and, you know, and we get them some health care. Because a lot of our kids are not able to take advantage of what it is that we have to offer because they're not well enough. 1 in 24 lives with neither parent. And that's a scenario, though, that most schools haven't thought about. And we do teacher preparation. We say the parents, the parents, the parents. Some kids are not living with the parents. Increasingly, kids are living with extended family members, grandparents, foster parents, older siblings, institutional parenting. And that's a reality. 1 in 139 will die before their first birthday. In some ways you might say, well, why are you even putting that up? Because we'll never really see those kids. That's true. They don't get into the formal school system. But I put it up there because infant mortality really is a measure of the goodness of a society. It's about the least of these. And when we don't care for these little ones, it says something about who we are. And, you know, again, just like NCLB made us disaggregate data in terms of standardized testing, the overall numbers for infant mortality in the U.S. are good. But when you zero in on places like Detroit, Oakland, Philadelphia, Chicago, and begin to look at the disaggregated data, you begin to see that there are infant mortality rates that rival developing nations. And we can do a lot better. And then finally, 1 in 1,056 will be killed by a gun before age 20. And while that's significant, is that those are kids that we have invested at least 13 years in, from kindergarten to grade 12. And they don't actually reach their full age of maturity before they're just gone. And that's the reality that we are living with as we try to prepare teachers. So how much ownership can a classroom teacher take for a society that has allowed its children to face such steep odds? And I believe that teachers have been made to be the problem because they represent the low-hanging fruit. Talking about broad social policy seems too complex, and so we spent decades, indeed centuries, systematically disadvantaging entire groups of students. The easiest target becomes the teacher, and by extension, the big bad union. Have you noticed how the discourse about teachers now runs? Some fresh-faced, but not very bright people set out to teach. We place them in outdated, weak teacher education programs where they waste hours learning how to teach instead of learning more subject matter. And once they get out of school, they head to school districts where the first thing they're asked to do is sign up with the union. And after 2 or 3 years, they earn tenure, and now they have jobs for life. And because of their seniority, they can't be fired, and some other young, enthusiastic, innovative new teachers can't replace them. Does that sound like a familiar narrative? Let's see if I got all my little pictures there, okay? I know it's the one I keep hearing. Unfortunately, it's a poor approximation of the truth. First, the problem of recruiting outstanding teacher candidates is a real one. Today's young people have so many more career choices, and those choices offer more lucrative remuneration. They also offer the most attractive pre-professional recruiting options. So, for example, when students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison are admitted to our engineering program, they often receive outstanding financial packages, summer internships, and job placement. Over at the School of Education, we have few resources to offer them. Our students pay their own way. They go to school and they work and or take out expensive loans. The question of tenure is an interesting one, because teachers cannot give themselves tenure. Some administrator has to verify their competence. The job of the union is to ensure that dismissals are not arbitrary or capricious. A failure to, quote, get rid of a teacher generally reflects a failure to fully document performance. That part of the story seemingly has not made its way into the grand narrative on teachers. And finally, who are these young, energetic teachers that we are depriving of an opportunity to teach in favor of old, washed-up, tenured dinosaurs? They can't be those not-so-bright, weak candidates with which we started the narrative. They must be the crew of alternatively certified teachers with a 6-week preparation program. Let's see where I am in this thing. Okay, no, let me get back there. Unfortunately, their track record is not nearly as good as some are claiming they are. In Louisiana, they remain at a rate of about 4% compared to traditionally prepared teachers who stay at a rate of 40%. Neither number is adequate, but the difference between 4 and 40 is startling. That means that 96% of these alternatively prepared teachers in Louisiana don't stay. And we do know if a district constantly hires in brand new teachers, What it does is it reduces its upfront costs because those people are hired at the first rung of the salary schedule. I think it's also important to point out that no other professional field or industry would dream of pushing out its most experienced people and expect to remain at the top. The best schools in our nation have incredible stability. I have to laugh because when I went to high school, 2 of my English teachers had taught my mother. You know, Mr. Seidman and Mr. Wilson had taught my mother. At one of the successful urban schools that I visited some years ago when I was researching successful teachers of African American students, I learned that the average teacher tenure at that school was 14 years. So this new chant of let's do something about last hired, first fired, I think is a ploy that attempts to exploit the language of civil rights and make the public believe that teachers and their unions are what's standing in the way of progress. Teachers are no more the source of the problem than your umbrella is the cause of rain. No made-up story about bad old teachers and good young ones can change the social realities of students' lives. We as a society have to make a decision to make a commitment to care for what I've called the least of these before we can expect our students to reach their full potential, not just as students, but as citizens and as human beings. So let's switch now to teachers as a solution, because if we cannot place all of the blame at the foot of teachers, does that mean that we can position teachers as the solution? And I'd argue that we cannot, but that the same grand narratives that drive the notion as a teacher as the villain is at work when we decide that the teachers are the heroes. The place where we see this narrative at work is in Hollywood. Film depictions of teachers almost always carry the same storyline. The school is horrible, the administrators are horrible, the parents are horrible, and often the kids are horrible, until one spectacular teacher shows up and turns things around. This teacher is a loner and the only one who cares in the entire building. This teacher fights the administrator, the parents, and her other colleagues. And often this teacher has received minimal, if any, teacher preparation. So these stories like Dangerous Minds or Music of the Heart and Freedom Ride are the kind of examples of this genre. And in this narrative, we have to see that the good teacher is the exception to the rule. This way, we don't disturb the ongoing narrative of teacher inferiority. This narrative posits one lone teacher who is set down in an entirely dysfunctional school. Her colleagues are unprofessional and uncaring, and before she arrived, no one exhibited any care or concern for the students. Other teachers, parents, and virtually every other adult has abandoned them. The other teachers think of them as unteachable savages. And because of her superior morality, this teacher is able to do what no other teacher has ever done. She persists where others gave up. She succeeds where others fail. And wait, she not only improves their academic lives, she improves their home lives. She gets the recalcitrant parents to step up to their responsibilities. She challenges the drug dealers and the gangbangers. She is indeed, in a word, the student's savior. It is this unrealistic and simplistic portrait of the teacher that is plaguing the profession. If you are not some sort of superhero, then you cannot be seen as a good teacher. And you certainly cannot be a superhero in concert with other teachers. You distinguish yourself by being, quote, not like the others. And I find this characterization especially troubling since it's the one that African American and other students of color regularly confront. The notion that some of us are special, exceptional, and different from the others demeans the contributions of our families, our communities, and the cultures that we come from in shaping who and how we are. Similarly, the set-apart teacher is used to condemn and discredit her colleagues. Her so-called exceptionality is used to reinforce the belief that the others are lazy or they just don't care. But we quickly forget that the exceptional teacher also had teachers. Someone assisted her along the way. She learned to teach from a combination of experience and careful guidance. So let's try to break through these prevailing discourses. And in my work on effective teachers of African American students, and I have nowhere where I am with this thing. Okay, black. Oh, forgot Hillary Swank. Okay. In my work on effective teachers of African American students, I learned that there are a number of outstanding teachers that most of the public never hears about. They're not perfect, but they're the kind of teachers any of us would be proud to have our own children have. And although they choose a variety of teaching strategies and approaches, they appear to have some other beliefs and dispositions in common that make them effective. The late Martin Haberman from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee calls them star teachers. And he identifies them by a number of qualities that include persistence. They are unwilling to give up on students, even the most oppositional or recalcitrant ones. One of the teachers just used to crack me up because her students, whenever she'd have these little battles with them and they'd get mad, and she said, there's one thing you can bank on. I'm going to be here tomorrow. You know, you can be mad at me as you want. I'm going to be here tomorrow. You know. They believe that in order to get results, you have to stick with it, often long past the time that others would. And most urban students who have not met with success will tell you that somewhere along the line, someone gave up on them. They believe in protecting learners and learning. Effective teachers recognize that the central enterprises of schooling are teaching and learning. So they avoid those things that detract from that mission. They don't waste time on anything else because they know what they have to offer students is different from anything else that others in their lives have to offer. So they're not trying to be their parent, trying to be the teacher. And they know that the time that they have with kids is sacred. They know how to translate theory into practice. You know, effective teachers are people who never talk about some aspect of education research as, quote, too theoretical. Rather, they ask themselves, how do I put that theory into practice? If the theory says that punishment does not work, but reward does, the effective teacher looks for ways to reward the behavior she wants to see over and over again. She's testing the theory. You know, I have to chuckle when people say to me, oh, well, you know, you're at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, you know, they're too theoretical. Okay, that's what we do, okay? If I had my way, we'd have a big neon sign that said theory shop, okay? Because that's what we do. If we were just practical, then we'd be a K-12 school. We're paid to develop knowledge and theory. And human beings are not only social, they are also theoretical. In other words, we figure out, in theory, if I do this, will I get that? You know, I don't know how many of you had the little Dr. Spock book, right? But it was like, okay, well, you should do this. Of course, when I looked at my kids, I'm like, ooh, something is seriously wrong. Because the book is saying this, and my kids ain't doing nothing like that, you know. But it gave me a way to think about what ought to be happening as they develop. They have a professional, personal orientation to students. That is, they know how to walk the fine line between familiarity and distance. They maintain their identity as a teacher, not the buddy, not the friend, not the pal. But they know how and when to open up and share more personal moments with students. They exhibit a genuine interest in students' lives, and they're willing to let students in on some of their personal life, not for prurient or exhibitionist purposes, but rather to connect with them in deeper, more meaningful ways. In other words, they trying to humanize themselves so that the kids will know, okay, I'm dealing with another human being, but not to just kind of lay out all their business. They have an approach to the so-called at-risk students. If anybody who knows me knows that I hesitate to use the term at-risk to describe students, because I think it shifts the responsibility to the most vulnerable. In 1983, the Commission on Excellence in Education declared that the nation was at risk. Now, how is it that we've decided that it's no longer the whole nation? It's just some people who are at risk. Before I came to Wisconsin, I used to teach at Santa Clara University, and those of you who know Santa Clara know that it is private, it is Catholic, it is Jesuit. Most of my students had never been to public school. They chose Santa Clara because it is private, it is Catholic, it is Jesuit. And it was an interesting place to be because they had almost no scholars of color in the university. There were 5 African Americans in the entire university teaching force. And I taught a course called Introduction to Teaching in a Multicultural Society that the university listed as fulfilling the ethnic studies requirement. So I didn't just have teachers, I had people from the business school and arts and sciences. And on day 1, I had a very typical Santa Clara course in which the only person of color in the class was me. And I opened by saying to them, this is going to be a very tough course. It's going to be tough for you, and it's going to be tough for me. Because I am not used to teaching at-risk students. Who's she talking about? But they were polite, because that's one of the things about people in private Catholic Jesuit schools. They are polite. I taught in Philadelphia. Trust me, they would have snapped on me, but these kids were polite. And for about 5 or 6 minutes, I kept inserting that phrase, at risk, in reference to them. I know it's a lot of reading, and I realize you're at risk, but we're going to get through this, okay? I'm going to hang with you to the end. Don't worry. I'm there for you. You know, I know there's a lot of writing involved, and I realize you're at risk. But you know what? I believe in you. You can do this. So finally, I got a guy who raised his hand in the back of the room. I said, yes, sir. He says, you know, I'm deeply offended. You know, that's what he said. I'm deeply offended at your constant referencing us as at risk. I said, oh, you are you? You've been at risk all of 5 minutes and you are pissed off. So now think about that. As I send you out to schools in this community where people have sent their most precious possession, and we've decided to call them at risk when they're 5 years old, and they're supposed to carry that label for the next 13 years and be successful, you know, that's the best 3rd grader that mother got. She doesn't have another one home in the china closet. You know, I send the bad one out, see how they do. If they do okay with that one, I got a good one back here. No, that's the best one they have. And we have to begin to think in those ways. And so the shift from the nation being at risk to individual is a serious one. And so I avoid that term whenever I can and tell that story. Haberman's point is that effective teachers have a planned strategy for dealing with the academic needs of students who are likely to struggle. They don't wait until they arrive in their classes and begin to figure out what to do. Rather, they start lining up scaffolding and bridging strategies so that these students recognize that they are full members of the classroom community from day one. And they are systematically helped along so that they can indeed get to grade level performance. These are folks who know how to deal with bureaucracy. All institutions have bureaucracy, and all bureaucracies have ways of thwarting the true purpose of the institution. Unsuccessful teachers are thrown by the demands of the bureaucracy. They become frustrated with the paperwork, the policies, and the procedures. Effective teachers make strategic decisions about which part of the bureaucracy they will attend to. They realize that no one can be fully responsive to a bureaucracy, and any attempt to do so actually takes away from the things they need to do. So many years ago, I was involved in a reading intervention for middle school kids, and it was a pet project of our school superintendent, and so it was 100 teachers across the city that they were doing these things. They were going to call it checkpoint centers because they had a lot of good stuff going on at early ages for kids, but not much for the middle school kids in terms of reading interventions. So, you know, the 100 of us would get together, and because it was brand new and because it was under the spotlight and the newspaper was on it, you know, the superintendent was going crazy, and it seemed like every time we met, there was a new set of things we were supposed to do. And so these meetings would be contentious, and the people would be yelling and screaming and hollering at the, you know, the person from downtown. And one of my friends was in it, and I would just sit there, and she said, "I know you. Why is it you're not joining this fight and arguing and fighting with us about this?" And I looked at her, I said, "Because I'm not going to do it." You know, I'm not going to stand up there and tell them I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. I said, now, when they're out checking on people, they're going to be checking on all y'all screaming and hollering. If they ever get to me, duh, it is 100 of us, right? If they ever get to me, I'm going to say, "Oh, were we supposed to do that?" You got to have a strategy for dealing with bureaucracy. Effective teachers are not afraid to admit that they make mistakes. But by doing so, it helps their students see their humanity. It also signals to students that they expect that they, too, will make mistakes. And these teachers help students to use their mistakes as learning experiences rather than ways to punish students. One of the things that I say to our students in our teacher ed program is it doesn't really matter how many A's you have on your transcript. It doesn't matter how good that letter is from your cooperating teacher. When you leave here, you'll be a beginner. And there is absolutely nothing we can do to change that. And as a beginner, you will make mistakes. Learn from them. This idea that they're finished products, no, they're beginners. Effective teachers have emotional and physical stamina because good teaching requires good mental and physical health. The work is grueling. Full days with energetic students, late afternoons and evenings of reviewing students' work and preparing for upcoming lessons, and it is never ending. Spending 180 days or more a year with lots of children and youth means being regularly exposed to every germ and disease imaginable. So teachers have to keep themselves in good physical health with strong immune systems. But effective teachers also have to maintain good mental and emotional health. Working with students can be a roller coaster ride. And the students' life challenges find their ways into the classroom, and good teachers are empathetic without losing their main focus. My first year of teaching, I had a young man in my homeroom, and I had him for English and social studies, who had been in 11 foster homes in 7 years. And he spent most of the year with me. He was kind of stable, and near the end of the year, they were going to move him again. And I just had a meltdown. And I went home and I told my husband, we got to adopt this kid. We got to adopt this kid. He just can't go no more places. And my husband said, okay, let's see if we can get this straight. How long you expect to be in this profession? Because this is year 1, okay? You think maybe you're going to do this maybe 20 years. 1 kid a year is going to kill us, you know. But literally, it was emotionally draining to know that just this one kid, I had 150 kids, right? I had 5 classes, you know, but I knew this one kid was going to end up somewhere else that wasn't going to just set him way back and get him started all over again. And you have to prepare for that level of emotional involvement. And they have organizational ability. Good teachers know that teaching is a bit of a juggling act. So to keep all the balls in the air, you have to be somewhat organized. They have a sense of how they want to structure learning and activities, and while they may appreciate and invite spontaneity, they're not looking to create chaos. Their classrooms are places where students understand the importance of rituals, routines, relationships, and rigor. And one of the most powerful lessons that I've learned from outstanding teachers is the need to convey to students and believe themselves that the only thing that stands between them and excellence is effort. Effective teachers do not predetermine students' potential and help them realize that if they're willing to put in more effort, they will reap more rewards. And I know most of you are dealing with kids who are in have special need designations. But I don't know how many of you have spent any time at Special Olympics, but you see effort on display. Effort. No, it's not going to be the fastest time. It's not going to be the furthest jump or discus throw. But with effort, it's going to be better than it was the last time. And so that whole view of youngsters as being able to put in enough effort to improve is what you see among these teachers. Unfortunately, far too many Americans, and this includes our teachers, believe that some people are smart and some people are not. In places like Japan or Singapore, students learn that smart is something you become, not something you already are. So I've had those parent conferences where I've sat down with kids, parents, and the parent tells me, well, I was never any good at English. And I have to be diplomatic, but the script in my head says I ain't trying to teach you. This notion that the only people who are good at something are the people whose parents are good at it. It's not so. My daughter's a mathematics whiz. I mean, when she can figure out stuff to take at UW-Madison, she's like, oh, I think I'd take a math course. I'm like, right? But I never said, oh, well, you know, I wasn't that great at math, or I found math arduous. I said, oh, okay, you know. And she just, you know, mom is pretty simple, you know. For one thing, it has answers, you know. She said, unlike that sociology stuff, you know, what's the answer? So really kind of pushing kids towards effort. And these are qualities I believe that any teacher who wants to be a good teacher can learn and cultivate. She doesn't have to be a superhero to be this kind of teacher. Rather, she has to be the kind of teacher who wants to be better. She has to be the kind of teacher who defends the profession in school and out. She has to be the kind of person who, when asked what she does for a living, is willing to say, I do the hardest, most important work in a free society. I teach. She has to be willing to challenge her colleagues to work together to help struggling colleagues. She has to be willing to accept legitimate critique as a means of professional improvement, and she has to stand up against ad hominem attacks against teachers in general, no matter who levels those attacks. In 2010, many of us viewed David Guggenheim's film Waiting for Superman as it made its way onto movie screens across America. And those of you who know me know I love film, okay? And so one of my big critiques about that film was that it was really bad cinematography. I'm just you know, before you even get to the content, I'm like, this is the best you can do, you know? It was such a deeply flawed film that I was shocked at how much attention it received. It was filled with internal contradictions and distortions about public schools and the teachers who work in them. And it used the classic tropes of the poor, disenfranchised students waiting for the prize spot in a charter school. The overall message of the film was that traditional public schools are all bad and charter schools are all good, even though the filmmaker does admit that only 1 in 5 charter schools is judged to be highly effective. And quite frankly, I don't like those odds. You know, I would never go into a car dealership and let him tell me 1 in 5 of these cars is going to be good. You know, not going to work for me. And as much flying as I do, I really don't want to hear the ticket counter say 1 in 5 of these flights is pretty good, you know. My challenge to you as folks who prepare teachers, as well as teachers themselves, is to refuse to accept this role of society's enemy. Refuse to be the scapegoats. Refuse to be the problem. Instead, as teachers and teacher educators, we need to be willing to go on the offense. We need to write our own editorials and our own op-ed statements. We need to invite policymakers and legislators into our schools and classrooms, because our job is to work together with our teaching professionals to help our nation wake up. Thank you. So now I have a little transition activity. Well, it's not an activity. Transition activity is just another activity, right? But I have an activity that I hope will get you talking about your role in teaching and teacher education. So I do need to kind of flip PowerPoint slides because they're not on the same thing. So hold on. Calling these few slides, and it's just 2 or 3 slides, the possible future of teacher education. This kind of maps out what I think of as conventional teacher education. That you have a general education, you know, you have these, quote, 40-plus liberal studies courses. If you're at the secondary level, you have a major. Often at the elementary level, you might have a minor. Sometimes you have a major plus a minor. I was a secondary person, so my major was history, my minor was English. So, and they need to be at some upper level, you know, division courses. And then you move into the professional sequence. And the professional sequence is typically foundational courses like child adolescent development, history of education, school and society, or sociology of education, philosophy of ed, so forth and so on. Then you have some methods courses, how to teach whatever it is you're teaching. And then you have field experiences. Sometimes you have them in combination with one another. Sometimes they're separate. Does this seem like a recognizable pattern for you? Okay? Yeses? Okay. Okay, here's the problem. I've taken this directly from my transcript. And I know I look young and fabulous, but I have been at this 44 years. Like, what? Okay, I was 12, okay. But think about it. This is my transcript from 1968. You gonna tell me things haven't changed? I just gave you all them slides about what kids are up against. And yet this is the way we still do it. You know, I'm not always excited about all these, you know, quote, new reforms and innovations, but I think about the old Flexner report. Some of you may remember this, but the Flexner Report is really what changed medical education in this country. They looked at the medical schools and they said, this is wrong. And they closed a bunch of medical schools because of what was going on, but then they improved the medical training. You know, now we're probably at a point where we need another Flexner for med school, because, I mean, I've had some young people who've gone through med schools that's still horrible, right? But we've maintained this pattern for a very long time. Now, the alternative people tend to do something a little bit different, and they say, well, you need a degree in some liberal studies discipline. Get the degree in physics, or get the degree in mathematics, or English, or history, or whatever it is. That's what you really need. And then get some kind of truncated preparation. Okay, let's boot camp you. 6 to 8 weeks, we get you ready, tell you a little bit of stuff to do, and then we'll place you out there. And you'll learn it on the job. The problem is, they also tell you don't talk to the people already on the job. Because they didn't know how, they didn't learn to do it this way, and they're going to tell you some other stuff, and it's going to confuse you, and it's going to be wrong, and you're supposed to be different. And as I said, the statistics are not good on their longevity. What they do is they teach a year, hate it, and then they open up a charter school. Okay. So your task is going to be, how could it be different? You know, we've got the two extremes. We got this, which has been in place for some time and is coming under attack, and this, which is popping up all over the place. And I think of those as kind of polar opposites. What I'm asking you to do, however, is less technocratic. I told you I'd come back to it. You know what technocratic means? Well, we'll have a longer school day. That'll fix it. Okay, I'm going to have a longer day with this crazy person. Well, we'll just have a longer school year. Oh, good. This terrible school I'm in, I'm just going to be in it even longer. That's technocratic, and as a society, we like that because we can point to it. We can say, see, they stay in school longer. See, they have a longer school year. So I don't want you to just think of technocratic stuff like add more courses, okay? And I know a lot of you are dealing with special education, and that's another term I'm not crazy about. I realize it's your term. Maybe stepping on toes here, but you know what? My car's sitting right out there. I got a car key. I'm going back home. But who shouldn't be getting a special education? Okay? And I hate this division, special ed, general ed, special ed, general. First of all, who is not going to teach somebody with a special need? You've taught any of my 4 children, you know my kids is all special. In all different ways. And now I got 5 grandchildren, you talking about special. Whoo! They really special. So I want you to begin to think about some different ways. You know, to me, you shouldn't be teaching in this society without enough skills and information to teach kids who have identifiable needs. That's just me, you know. I don't think you should be over in some place called general ed so that you can then show up in a classroom and say, I wasn't prepared to teach these kind of children. Okay, these are the ones we got. We don't have no other ones. I feel that same way about kids whose first language is other than English. Okay? You don't get to be over in this corner, in this made-up country or place where only people are just like you. That doesn't exist. You have to learn to be skillful and flexible enough to teach all kinds of kids. So that's what I mean by transactional, not just the sort of technocratic thing of, well, let's just add this course. Because that's our typical strategy. We'll just have a course in inclusive schooling. They'll get it. No, they won't. It'll be on the sheet. They'll be mad because it's another requirement. and be sitting in my office saying, I couldn't get into the inclusive course, schooling course, now I'm going to have to have another semester here. Why is that course sitting out there anyway? A transactional response would be a faculty sitting down saying, how do we deal with inclusivity in the teaching of mathematics, in the teaching of history? I mean, so that's what I want you to be thinking about. So your task, you probably get about 20 minutes because they're not, you know, it's a typical conference thing, right? But your task is to try to come up with, at your table, a different way of thinking about the preparation of teachers. Now, here's the advantage. There are no limits to what you can come up with. Just pretend there's no such thing as Act 10, right? So no budget restrictions, not personnel restrictions. You can design that teacher education program to look any way you want it. But I would encourage you to focus, as I said, on the transactional, not just the technocratic, not just adding a course, okay, not just extending the preparation. What kinds of things need to be happening within this program that you're proposing? Okay, questions before I turn you loose? Okay, go at it. Okay, I know you're still talking. And hopefully it's the kind of talk you will have when you return to your institutions and programs. But what are some things that you came up with as a way to transform teacher preparation? Yes. Okay. 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 Another transactional strategy to transform teacher ed at your institution you came up with? There's a lot of talk. Okay, yes.
Pardon my southern accent.
You got a southern accent?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
You listen to me talk long enough, you'll hear it. But we were discussing the need for just stronger and more open relationships between universities and public schools. The gist of it being get them more field experiences early on, as often as possible.
And if I could add to that, we were talking not only about the field experiences, but also the larger teacher ed program. For example, if you have foundations classes, during foundations classes, they have a connection with the school district. It's an organic connection where they would see, okay, here's how budget decisions are made. Here's what the school board does. All of this, so there's a tie-in with everything they learn to how to apply to the school. So not just a field experience here and there, because we come from a university where we have a number of professional development schools, but it's even more holistic than that.
Okay, so, you know, one of the things we know that is present in our profession is this divide between the university and the schools. And the poor students are caught in the middle. So they go out to do student teaching or practical and field experiences, and one of the things they hear is, those people don't know what they're talking about at the university. And so then the students have these divided loyalties because they actually enjoy learning with you. But they're being told over and over sometimes that we don't know what we're talking about. Most professions try to do a better job at merging theory and practice. Now, I'm not saying that they all do a great job. But part of the dirty little secret of teacher education is we can't teach you how to teach. We really can't. You can take every course in the book. You can get A's in every last one of them. You will not be a teacher until you start teaching. Now, we're not alone. Medical schools can't teach you how to be a doctor. You're not going to be a doctor till you start practicing. I can take all 3 years of the law school curriculum and get A's. That is not going to make me a lawyer. Until I've practiced law, I won't be a lawyer. And so until you begin teaching, that's what makes you a teacher. Now, we can give you good background information. We can try to load you up with some strategies. We can help you make better decisions than the lay person. But you become a teacher by teaching. And so that's another mindset that we have to kind of get people to understand. We're just kind of, it's called teacher preparation for a reason. Stop calling it teacher training. I know I'm going to make somebody else mad too, but I never use that term training. I will allow those people in the gym to do training with me because I'm not trying to really learn nothing. I'm not trying to get educated about these reps. You're just trying to train me. But we aren't training people, we're educating them. And we're preparing them. So that's just me, you know. You don't have to go along with that. Okay, another thing you talked about, Kathy. Got some of my own people in here, so y'all don't have to like me.
We went one step further and said we should require pre-service faculty to keep 1 foot in the classroom and be required to teach a public school class.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Mandate that, please.
So I'm just writing this as maintaining a presence in practice. This is a two-edged sword. This actually was a part of a law in California when I was there. Didn't work very well. And I felt strongly that people have sent their kids to school to get an education. And somebody, because they have to be there, is out there playing around with them. So that's why I said maintain a presence. And so it may not be that you end up, quote, in the classroom, but that you are in schools in some fundamental and helpful ways. So, okay, yes. Oh, good.
This was not an original idea, but it's a way to blend the on-the-job training from the alternative programs with what you were just talking about maintaining a presence. I heard a presentation at AACTE this year from the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and they do the instruction of their field-related courses and foundational courses in the schools.
Okay.
So it's somewhat like a professional development school, but then it gives the college faculty the opportunity to do model lessons on occasion and be very present in the schools where the classes are taught.
My shorthand for that is that we have, quote, teaching schools. You know, we call the University of Wisconsin-Madison Med School a teaching hospital. So those are real sick people in that hospital. We didn't just bring them in for people to play around with. People got real diseases and real maladies. But we use it as a place to teach. And so we actually created, quote, teaching schools, K-12 schools where we do teaching with real kids and real teachers is a way to do that. Somebody else think, yes?
I think the field students, the field experience should have a little diversity in experiences that support our theory, so they have opportunities to compare different types of settings, so it's just not always the traditional setting.
non-traditional field experiences. I love that idea. When I was at Santa Clara for our reading course that was required for secondary level people who were not, quote, going to be reading teachers, but the state required to have a course in reading, we put them in the juvenile justice system and put them in a one-on-one. So no, we don't want you to walk into a classroom with people who, quote, can read and then decide that, well, 2 or 3 can't read and that's their problem. We want you in a one-on-one relationship with somebody who probably struggles to read because there's a high correlation between literacy and the juvenile justice system. Many of the people sitting in jail struggle in school. It was, in many cases, a life-changing experience. First of all, how difficult it is to teach just one person how to read. And yet your expectation is that you'll be teaching 25, 30 at a clip. And some of them will not be readers. So that was a non-traditional field experience for them, but many of them talk about it as one of the sort of watershed moments in their teacher preparation that I really got a chance to one-on-one figure out when you sit with an individual and try to teach them something, it's hard work, you know? Okay, somebody else. Yes. Are you closer back there? Yeah.
Okay, so you said money was not an option.
Yeah,
time was not an option. Staff was not an option.
That's the way I live my life. Ask my husband. Oh, we can get that. That don't cost nothing, you know.
So with all those out of the way, we spent some time creating a dual secondary major so that our students are better prepared at the high school level to work with all students.
So in other words, not just people who are teaching elementary school, but our folks who are teaching in secondary schools in which there is, English teachers or math teachers, but that there's a major or at least a way to go through a preparation program in which you'll be prepared to teach kids who have special needs designations at the secondary level. Because sometimes we kind of just forget about those kids and those teachers. You know, you just need to go over in that room and work with those kids because, I'm doing college prep or whatever. Okay, another idea. Okay.
Well, you said the sky's the limit.
That's how you know. That's the way I live my life.
A suggestion that all of our students get something like an internship so they can work right through in the classroom for 3 years, right on through their student teaching, and they are paid rather than having the competition with another job.
Okay.
That they can work in a plethora of situations.
Okay.
And to support it, I guess we can be adopted by J.P. Morgan.
Mm-hmm. No, he's going to lose $1 billion in a day. I'm telling you that right now. But yeah, a paid internship, we can get out of these boxes of thinking that the only place that you want to place somebody, as someone said about the non-traditional field experiences, my colleagues I have some colleagues in London, and in their program, you're required to work across the entire lifespan. I don't care if you want to be a physics teacher. You got to work with some little kids. I don't care if you want to be an early childhood educator. You have to work with people in gerontology. You got to understand the whole thing. And the conversations that these students have had with people who are near the end of their lives as they talk about what their education did or didn't do for them. It's very powerful in their understanding where they're going to fit. I know I'm going to teach early childhood, but I talk to someone who's 88 and 89, 90 years old. and realize, they're not going to always be 4. They're headed somewhere. And so to get this whole lifespan thing, not just child and adolescent development, but human development, was an important part of their preparation. Okay. Anybody else? I saw some more hands. Yes.
Student teaching abroad or a practicum abroad, to step away from what the known is in terms of the teaching environments and opportunities. And then another idea is to have a paid internship, which is similar to what was said, but with a different format, with a really strong mentoring program.
And okay.
So, and I can give an example. In Europe, it's what's called teaching rounds.
Okay, just like you have medical rounds,
right.
Okay?
So teaching rounds where first years, they have a teaching license, they are licensed teachers, but they are not considered ready to be on their own, taking over a classroom. So they have 2 years of teaching rounds, sometimes 1, sometimes 2 years, depending on their certification.
Right.
And they have 6-month internships, paid internships in various schools, in various environments, conditions, social situations.
Right. And what you're
and that teaching rounds includes trainees, graduates, trainees, professors from the university, and specialists and consultants who work with schools to improve school practices.
So what she's speaking to is a system that says everybody's not at the same place, which is the opposite of what we do, right? We take new people and give them the same level of responsibility and the same workload as people who really experience. Actually, we give them worse, right? Because they don't get to teach advanced placement, or they don't get to do gifted and talented. They get to do the kids that we're struggling with. It's the total opposite of what our colleagues in other professions do. You can have a lot of A's on your transcript coming out of med school, but you're not going to do no heart-lung transplant up in here. You're going to watch people do it. You're going to learn to do it. You can have a ton of A's on your transcript, but you're not trying a capital case. You're going to probably be doing billable hours. You're going to clerk. So we have got to be serious about this notion of career trajectories. You can want to call them career ladders, whatever, but that everybody's not at the same place. And if they're going to grow as teachers, they need that kind of support. We are doing some student teaching abroad at Wisconsin, at Madison. It's limited, and the primary reason why we want to do it is because the university is pushing globalization and internationalization, and the people who are being left out are the teachers. So people who have majors in engineering or creative writing or whatever are going all around the world because we got campuses everywhere, but our teachers aren't. So we've actually reestablished, we used to have one in Peterborough, England, one in Quito, Ecuador, one in New Zealand. We've kind of closed those down, and we reopened one in Uganda, and I think we're probably going to do one in China. And those are not just about them going to teach, it's about them being the kind of international and global professionals that we like them to be. I probably would also tie to what she said is that we've got to have an idea of the teaching profession as a national profession. I'm not talking about national board certification, I work with them a lot. But we have all these crazy laws from state to state. So I left Pennsylvania and went to California, and I was fine. I had reciprocity. I was from a state that had reciprocity with California. But a colleague from Nevada, the state right next to California, could not get a California teaching license because they didn't have reciprocity. So we've got to begin to do something about these really crazy bureaucratic rules that make it impossible to have more mobile, flexible teaching certifications and licensures. Yes?
have you tried, or in what ways have you used teaching in other states? I find some students are really hesitant to do student teaching in South America, but they might go to Texas, or they might go, to another state to get out of Wisconsin to teach. And I'm curious about programs that make that
Now, we've
possible.
never done it. Is there anybody who has a program that has people work out of state? Where are you?
We have student teachers who work with the Teach Chicago program through the Center for Urban Life and Culture in Chicago. And we also have a Navajo reservation program where students can go through a partnership with Indiana University to student teach in Navajo reservation schools in Utah, Arizona, or New Mexico.
So it's not that crazy an idea, that indeed we can do things differently than what we're doing. We typically do what we do because that's what we've been doing. Yes, sir.
We have a relationship with Aldine School District in Houston, or just north of Houston, and we've been sending student teachers down there for, I think it's been about a half a dozen years now.
Okay. Do you have a faculty person who coordinates that program, or you have collaboration with the university down there?
No, we have somebody who coordinates it, and they look after all our supervision requirements, and so the students participate to the extent that they have to comply with the Wisconsin requirements, and so they prepare all their materials with that in mind, but they also get the Texas perspective as well.
Okay, great. Any other ideas? Yes.
This relates more to special education training, but to have yes, special education preparation. Thank you very much. Developing a transdisciplinary skill mindset where students are taught and exposed to the integration of all of the related services, and how when they're working with the child throughout the school day, they're not just teaching reading and math and so forth, but they're integrating what that child needs in terms of occupational therapy and physical therapy and speech and language therapy. So all of the skills that are taught in the other services that really embody that whole child are reinforced throughout that child's day. And having that expertise, what is sensory integration, and how do you incorporate that into the student's daily needs?
She said developing in this transdisciplinary orientation. I like that. It's what parents do all the time. Parents don't say, it's this bedtime story. That's the only thing I'm going to deal with. It's just a bedtime story. I don't want to hear about your problems. I don't want to hear about your issues. We're just going to deal with the bedtime story. You don't get that luxury. At least I didn't. That indeed you're dealing with a whole human being who has a whole range of issues. A colleague, Mary Louise Gomez, and I did a early literacy project some years ago. And what we did is we brought these teachers together, and we asked the teachers to tell us, who are the kids about whose literacy you're most concerned? We didn't ask why you're concerned about them. We didn't ask to see any scores. We just want to know, who are the kids that you're really concerned they're not going to learn to read? One of the things we learned in that process is that some of those kids were being touched by 4 and 5 teachers in that group, but those 4 or 5 teachers weren't talking to each other. So we had this experience where one teacher who was the classroom teacher said, well, I told him to do X. And reading recovery teacher said, well, I told him to do Y. And chapter 1 teacher said, well, I told him to do Z. And the special educator said, well, I told him to do A. And they looked at each other and said, well, no wonder he's confused. Because you got 4 different people interacting with this youngster, but they aren't talking to each other. And so the youngster's trying to figure out, well, who do I respond to? Who do I try to please in this process? In the meantime, everybody's upset with him because he isn't doing any of it because it's all kind of confusing him. So this notion of transdisciplinarity is, how do we have a more holistic approach of dealing with who we have in our classrooms? Okay, you got one back there?
Okay. We talked about the correspondence between regular ed and special education courses, and the idea that you could combine some of those courses and say, well, whether you're going the regular education track or the special education track, you take the same course, and it would prepare all teachers for whatever the content was from either perspective. And then we even talked about the idea that teachers could go through the teacher, what's the right word, prep or training?
Preparation.
Prep.
Or education.
Teacher
Teacher
programs.
education.
Yeah, that they could go through and get a dual certification for whatever age range that they were going at, and then as part of that would get experience in both regular education and special education settings. It's kind of like what we're talking about. If we want to do transactions, sometimes if a person only has that special education background, they're trying to talk about how to deal with a kid in a large group, and they've never ever worked with a large group.
Right.
They don't know what the realities of that are.
Right.
So if you had experience in both settings as part of your teacher preparation, then you'd be better able to work in that collegial way.
Right, and if you think about some of the things we've talked about in terms of not having novice teachers take on everything, then they could get better at things as they move through their careers. I mean, I just felt like, my brother and I, although we are, there's a gap in our ages. He's 7 years older than I am. But because he went in the armed services, we actually ended up being in college at the same time. He only started college like a year ahead of me. But he went into corporate America. He went to work for IBM. And he had all this orientation, and he had this big conversation with the HR director about where he wanted to be 5 years from now and what IBM could do to help ensure he got there, even if where he wanted to be was out of IBM. I mean, some people gave me a key and a stack of teaching manuals for U.S. history, rest of social studies, and English, and said, see you later. Like my whole career was going to be up in room 301. So they had no vision of me as a professional who was going to grow. And I was pretty much on my own. Okay, I'm mindful of our time, and I don't want to suggest that I haven't thought about this stuff myself. So I have one last slide that really kind of lays out a program that we tried experimentally that actually worked quite well. But anytime you do something that works well, they make you stop it. So, so we don't have the program anymore. But here's what I think of as a more transactional approach. That what we did is we looked at people who had BA degrees and who had life experiences. Because one of our challenges is that, when you're 19, you're 19. You think like a 19-year-old. You had 19 years worth of experience, and sometimes that's not going to be enough. So we began to look for people who looked differently. Because one of the places where you have control is at the gate. There's a couple places you have control. At the gate. You have control before you let them go out into student teaching. Just because you're in the program, you don't have to student teach. And I think we feel obligated. Oh, they've been in our program. We should have them go on. No, as from what we see, you don't look like a good candidate. We're going to let you get a degree, but you are not getting licensure because we're not recommending you. And then another place you have control is at the end of the entire program. And just because you did student teach doesn't mean we recommend you. But we teachers, we nice. we're going to recommend you. So we got a bunch of folks who looked a little bit different. They were older, had done some other things. Some of them did other professional things and decided, you know what, I actually do want to be a teacher. I always wanted to be a teacher, and I let these people talk me out of it. And now I'm grown, and I'm going to be a teacher. But one of the first things we did with them was community involvement, because schools are in communities. I had to argue on this one because my colleague said, no, let's put them in school. And I said, no, don't put them in school first. Put them in the community first. No, we didn't put them in schools. Well, they learned after the first year that's not a good idea. So they began putting them in communities. And why did I argue for communities? Because kids are usually pretty successful in communities. They pretty much figured out how to be okay in a community. So we put them in summer camps, day camps. We did some work with Salvation Army, the Y, neighborhood centers, so that come fall, when they saw these kids, they were like, wait a minute, this kid is like a genius. I've seen him. Why is he struggling in school? That asked a whole different set of questions than you see them in school, they're struggling. So it must be something wrong with them. So the community involvement was important, and we maintained it. And that's why I've kind of put this in an ongoing circle. It's almost like you don't know where we begin and where we end. So even once we got into the regular preparation courses, you still had to have some community involvement. And we allow people to select their own community involvement piece. We didn't just assign them. So I had someone who, their community involvement is they worked the parental stress hotline, because they were working too, and it was hard for them to, quote, put in hours, but they were on the end of that telephone. And they said, working that parental stress hotline made me really rethink this whole notion of homework. It did. Because here were these parents who, we're running out of money, we're going to be put out of our apartment. I don't know where we're going to go. I'm fighting with the other parent. I'm the custodial parent. I mean, all of this stuff looms so much larger than did you get the homework done. Another woman did her community involvement at a food kitchen. And she told the people there, she says, I'll do all the prep work you need me to do. I'll do all the cleanup you need me to do. But during the meal, I don't want to serve. I want to sit and eat. Now, I'll pay for my meal, but I want to sit and eat. And so she sat and ate with families of kids that she taught. And, she'd say something to them like, oh, you eat here too. In other words, I eat here. It gave her an entirely different take on what it meant for families to be trying to make their way. We did redesign methods courses, because first of all, we figured out we got way too many of them. I think we had 11 in the elementary program. So we combined a lot of them. And that was big battle. But we did it anyway. And we had what I would call coterminous field experiences. In other words, you didn't, have methods and didn't go, all of this stuff. In other words, once we put you in schools, you stayed in schools the whole time. And rather than, quote, the different field experiences, which we now have, where they have to do one for literacy, one for math, one for the science, we put our people in a school, and they stayed there all year. Because we said, we're actually not putting you in a school, we're putting you in a community. And this school is a part of this community. Now, you might move around in that school. So you might teach second grade part of the year in that school, and then you might go to fifth grade. But we want you in this community. The other thing is that our relationship with the professionals in that school were different. We said, we are not going to assign these young people to classrooms. We are assigning them to your school. You need to figure out what you want to do with them. So different schools did it different ways. Some schools did it more conventionally. They said, okay, we have a group of, practicum / student teachers who want somebody that, very much like what we done. But others said, no, we're going to do rotations. So you're not staying in any one class more than about 6 weeks. We're going to keep moving you and shifting you. So you get to see what the whole experience is in this school. Some people said, we're going to put you part of your time in those courses where the kids leave us and you never see what they do. So actually, part of your time, you're going to be in gym. I know you're not getting a physical education certification, but the kids you work with go to gym. And you need to see, how does the physical educator work with them? And who's more successful there than they are with us? Part of your time is going to be in special ed self-contained classrooms. So part of your time will be in bilingual ESL classrooms. You're not just going to sit here with us doing what we do. But we let the schools determine that. We didn't make that assignment. And then you'll notice that foundations, we actually put the foundations at the end. I wish I could tell you that we had thought that out, but we really just said, well, we ended up not having any foundations courses. Okay, put it here. So the last summer that we had with them, our program ran from a summer to a summer. So the first summer is when they were in the community involvement. The last summer, they were in the foundations. Our colleagues over in foundations loved those students. They bug us to this day. When are you going to bring that program back? Because they came into those classrooms saying, I know the theory says X, Y, or Z, but I've been working in a classroom, in a school all year, and I saw a kid who was doing this. Help me understand this. So that now it wasn't just, it's just theory. It's like the research is saying this, but I've experienced something else. Or this research actually confirms what I was grappling with. They had something to think about. And like I said, we just did it because we had to figure out where to put those courses. But it reminded me of the difference that I had taking a statistics course the first year of graduate school where I couldn't figure out any of this stuff, versus the second and third courses where the professor says people don't like statistics so they don't have any data. You got artificial data. You got the data in the textbook. You need to go get some data. And once we got the data, the statistics was interesting because I was vested in the data. Well, similarly with the foundations, because if you've never seen a kid with autism, reading about autism is just reading about autism. But if you've been in a classroom where a kid is struggling and you learn that the kid is autistic, once you sit in that foundations course that talks about those kids, now you got something to say, oh, well, now I understand that. Oh, I didn't know that. So I love the idea of putting the foundations at the end. But we keep it as a circle because I have PD there, that professional development ought to be an ongoing process. That if we're going to do what it is that we say we're going to do to upgrade our teachers and help them be better professionals, they need a way to continually learn. And I actually don't care what they learn in terms of coursework or what they take on. I think just like we talk about having IEPs for kids, every teacher ought to have an IEP that says, I want to learn Spanish. Okay, that doesn't look like a typical professional development, but I can see that numbers, growing numbers of my kids are Spanish speaking. That's part of my professional development. I want to learn this language. That's going to be a different professional development experience than the teacher who says, I am so struggling with classroom management. And I really need to learn more about that. Or I'm struggling with parent and family engagement. And until we help our administrators understand that this one-size-fits-all thing, it's never going to work. You know, when these schools call me and tell me, well, I want you to come for professional development, I'm like, why? And I know why. You got a blank day. It probably has less to do with me than it is that they got to fill in this professional development day. So I asked them a bunch of questions, and that gets rid of like 80% of them, right? Okay, what have you been doing around this issue before you decide to call me? What's your plan for what you're going to do after I leave? Oh man, I eliminate 80% of them because they had no plan. What they have is a blank day. But my point is, everybody in there doesn't need me. Some people need some other specific things, and then when we've got, just like, you know, we're saying what kids have individual strengths and challenges, so do our teachers. So that's a new possibility. It's not the only possibility. It was great hearing some of your suggestions. My hope is that you won't let it just die here, that the conversations you have at your institutions will prompt you when someone says, oh, we need to add a course on so that you say, well, wait a minute. Let's not do just a technocratic response. Let's think about a more transactional one so we can really transform teacher education. So I thank you so much. You've been a great audience, and best wishes.
Thank you so much, Gloria, that you've left us with lots of things to think about, and it's really the perfect wrap-up from the conversations to where we spent a lot of big picture, a lot of technical, a lot of really big picture frameworks to help you think about how you may reinvest and reinvent, as you challenged us to do from the very beginning, in your teacher preparation programs. Do you have some wrap-up? Okay.
I just want to add my thanks to all of you again for making the time to be here. Thank you to all of our presenters for your time and effort and expertise in bringing that to the larger group as well. I want to thank my IHE Advisory Committee members, without whose collective brain power this would not have had the impact that it has had. Dr. Elliott, of course, from yesterday. A couple of housekeeping items. Make sure that you've filled out a claim for reimbursement form, so see Judy out at the registration desk. There are boxed lunches out in the hallway where breakfast was this morning, so you are welcome to grab and go and hit the road if you need to. This room and the room next door are available to you until 2 p.m. today. So if you want to have lunch at a table and meet with your team and capture what you have learned over the last day and a half, you are more than welcome to do so. And just thanks again. This is so informing to me as I go forward thinking in terms of a new state personnel development grant and working with all of you to move our state forward. Thank you.